Hello guys, thanks for tuning in. This is of course the weekly 5y5, a podcast and or YouTube video talking all things 5 yards. George Ellick's with me, Ali Maxwell. We've got 5 players to profile today, all of whom we are leaning on the expertise of special guests. So we'll get into it swiftly. But George, plenty going on in the 5 yards universe. And of course, with the Champions League coming thick and fast at us, young Haaland basically breaking the whole sport by the sound of things. It's an interesting time in 5 yards terms.
Oui, c'est vrai. Il est un joueur extraordinaire, je pense. Comment? Ah, d'accord. I thought this was the French episode. It is. We're doing Ligue 1 today. I thought we were doing it all in French. Excuse my my French, I must say. Yeah, great night of Champions League last night. Haaland doing his thing. We've got a couple of good interviewees, 2 people who know a lot more about Ligue 1 than you or I. I doubt they can speak French as well as I can, though. But really, really interesting stuff. And interesting to hear from them. Well, from Andy Francis, who's a 5 yard scout, who I speak to about 4 players going up on 5 yards. Just hearing him talking about how important Champions League PP is, and it's always easy to forget that. But nights like last night, for those who bought Haaland, absolutely crucial, because not only does he score 2 goals, it's a victory. They're through to the next round as well. Really, you know, the most expensive player, the second most expensive player up on 5 yards. Those who've taken the plunge, looking pretty good this morning.
No surprise to see a group of Juventus players as part of a group of those whose price is falling. Make sure that you follow the 5 yards Twitter account, guys, for regular updates on price changes, on players going up on the platform. But now it's time to get our teeth stuck into a couple of interesting players from across the world of football. We're starting with a French speaker, talking to Sam Tighe about Ismail Bennacer, and then George with Andy Francis talking about 4 interesting players from French football heading up at the end of this week. So a French theme to proceedings. On y va avec Sam Tighe. Time for our first guest of this week's episode, a returning guest joining me, Sam Tighe, whose 5Y alias, as far as I can tell from the name he's used to sign up to this call, is Typhoon Tigre. Sam joins us on loan from the Ranks FC podcast, which is a must-listen for any football fan, but specifically, I think, in 5Y terms, Sam, just because of the breadth of football that you cover from across Europe, and the fact that you're by no means just focused on the biggest teams and the biggest names, but basically what we're trying to do, trying to identify talent, trying to be some of the first people to pick out those star names from across European football.
Yeah, I mean, it's a particular focus of mine, a particular interest. Look, Ali, I worked for Bleacher Report for 8 years. I've talked about the big guns enough, you know. I've talked about Messi, Ronaldo, Juventus, Barcelona, Real Madrid, Clásicos. I've done my time there. I mean, I'm sure there's a certain point in the next couple of years where the enchanting nature of those specific games and teams may come back. But I was force-fed that content for a long time, and right now, out on my own with Ranks as an independent venture, I can talk about whatever the hell I want, and I'm taking that opportunity.
Mate, I actually, knowing you quite well, I think there is a case of sort of trauma every time the words Cristiano Ronaldo, Lionel Messi get brought up now, because of how much you've done on that particular duo over the years. It's absolutely not what we're talking about, thankfully, today. Previously, you've been on 5y5 and told us about Donyell Malen, and that was one which I listened to, I considered, and personally did not add Malen to my squad, something I've been regretting ever since, because I'm not actually sure there's any player, barring potentially Michael Olise, that's risen in value as much since the platform launched than Malen. So no pressure second time around, but we were talking over the weekend about a player that caught your eye, that you thought merited a deeper look in 5Y terms, and it's Ismail Bennacer, who plays for AC Milan, central midfielder type, 20 million on 5 yards. First and foremost, you know how it works. We want a little scout report from someone who knows the player well.
Yeah, I actually love Bennacer. I think he's brilliant. For the last sort of like 15 months or so, he's really caught my eye, having moved to AC Milan. And he's a player that, I mean, I try to stray away from this comparison as much as possible because it becomes go-to and it becomes unfair. But there is a tenacity and a relentlessness to Bennacer in the tackle and the challenge that you just cannot shake those N'Golo Kante vibes off, right? It's just there for you. He just hunts the ball, and there's no stopping him. The determination levels in his tackling and his hunting for the ball in midfield are just so impressive. And when you add that to the fact that he's not only very smooth in the short passing game and trying to carry the ball out of pressure and sort of dealing with pressure from opponents, and there's a long-range vision there as well. He can drop a 40-yard dime. He can find Zlatan's chest. He can find the run of Rafa Leao. All of this adds up. Wonderful, wonderful player. I literally have one concern about Benacer. One. That's it. And it's nothing that he can control. It's his height. And I'd say that profiling a player of his position, which is probably the deepest of a midfield three or one of two in a pivot, there are going to be top clubs out there because modern recruitment trends tell us that they want a player who's 6 foot or more in that area. You look at Busquets, you look at Rodri, you look at Ndidi, you look at Casemiro. They like a bigger player there to be more of an aerial threat, good in both boxes. Look, Benacer is... I'm 6'4", so I can't tell exactly how small these people are, but he's like 5'10" max, maybe even 5'9". I don't know. Either way, he's a little on the small side. I think he probably tries to make up for that a little bit with the sheer tenacity and the devilishness of his play. But there's also that smooth and composed and calm side to him on the ball as well, which to me points to basically a complete footballer.
I have noticed that he hasn't featured too much for AC Milan this season. Now, I gather there's some injury issues here, but in 5Y terms, it is a red flag. I mean, first and foremost, we're just talking about his spot at Milan being up for grabs before we project any further. Any concerns for you that he would struggle to get back into the side when he's fit?
No, not at all. I mean, there was a very, very strong correlation with AC Milan winning games and Benacer playing earlier this season. And it was really only to do with the fact that he had an injury, came back and then re-aggravated it, I think in the Europa League tie, actually, against that Serbian team that I just cannot pronounce. I'm really sorry. So he's ducked out again for the last few weeks as a result of that. But they want to get him back in as quickly as possible. Look, Milan have, Frank Kessie, who is awesome. I think Kessie's brilliant. Then they have Sandro Tonali, who for most of this season has disappointed. He's picked it up a little bit of late, but only in comparison to his poor performances beforehand. And then they took Mete in January as a cover. And he's just on loan. He's a fourth choice central midfielder when everyone's fit. I have no concerns about Benacer coming back into the lineup because he's one of their best players. And I think he's probably their best central midfielder. And that's saying a lot because Kessie is superb. Right? So I'm not really worried about that. And the consistency levels that he showed for the 12 months or so ahead of this injury were really, really strong. Like, he was one of the best central midfielders in European football, in my opinion. Like, we're not talking like Ballon d'Or candidate or anything like that, but you want a sort of steady 7 or 8 out of 10 every week from a player in his position, and that is Benacer, in my opinion.
So he's 23 at the moment. He came through with Arles in France. Tough word to say that.
Who, sorry?
I think I've just about done it. And then he joined Arsenal, of course, where he spent a few years as a teenager, didn't break through, left and kind of found his feet, I guess, with Empoli, now with Milan. Plenty of caps already, 25 for Algeria. When we were talking about whether he was the sort of player we wanted to add to our squad, I think 20 million feels low for someone who plays for a club in AC Milan's position. But of course, he's not a sort of what we would always term a PP machine, right? You talked about his tenacity and his grace. Not a huge goal threat. And with assists, well, you and I were debating how carried away can you even get about someone who gets a lot of assists, given that generally even those who rack up assists tend to be low volume compared to goal scorers. So just in terms of performance pay projections, this was one, it wasn't cut and dried, right? There's a lot to think about when it comes to Benacer.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the difference between looking at his value at 20 million and continuing to understand and realise that doesn't mean that he's worth 20 million in real life, right? It's an in-game valuation based on PP, and you have to basically work out how many games you think this guy can win, because the goals and assists, I'm not expecting any more than sort of a combined 3 per season. He takes the odd corner. He obviously doesn't shoot very much. He's barely scored any goals in his career. He's a deep-lying midfielder. So you have to basically ask yourself, is he in a position to win games? And with Milan this season, he absolutely has been. If you're projecting that Milan will finish in the top 4 of Serie A and therefore get, minimum 6 bites at the Champions League cherry on 5 yards terms next season.
Sweet Champions League PP.
I mean, if you think that that's going to happen, then this valuation can quite quickly turn into something that I think is probably under where he should be. And you could also throw in the fact that if you believe in Benacer as much as I do, and I really do, that if he doesn't hang around in the Champions League spots and Milan don't quite hit those heights of European football again, I mean, I think he could genuinely go and play for anybody. Like, I think he could play for Pep's Man City. I think he could fix a lot of problems at Manchester United. I think he could play for Real Madrid. If Barca had any money, then I'd take a look at him too. You know, this is a player that not only is a good position, potentially moving into a very strong position, but a player that, if that doesn't quite happen, can go and find himself a really strong position elsewhere. So this is part of the game, isn't it? It's identifying the player and saying, well, where else could he fit? And if the answer's everywhere, then there's every reason to feel confidence in him. Just very quickly, when you talked about, you reminded me that he was at Arsenal and didn't make the breakthrough. I just realised this is 2 out of 2 appearances for me on this, talking about failed Arsenal academy products that have actually turned out to be absolutely awesome.
That's a great point. Marlon at PSV, isn't it? And now Benacer with Milan. Well, Marlon's done you very well. You definitely sold Benacer well to me, so I'm grateful for you talking us through it on the pod. As you say, it's an interesting one from a PP perspective. If you believe that this is a player who will play Champions League football both immediately, as in next season, with AC Milan, they're in a good position. Not a banker necessarily for that top 4, but in a strong position, you'd say. But equally, it's not just about the PP, is it? You want to be owning players in your squad whose value is likely to rise, or whose value you think will rise more specifically over the next year or two, so that your asset, I guess, increases in value. And well, if you're projecting either staying at a Milan side, if they can keep him, that will mean they're probably doing quite well or continuing to do well. But his next move as well could be something quite interesting. So thank you.
I think Milan, sorry, Ali. I think Milan, like, if they don't make it into the Champions League this season, then Benacer can go and find it elsewhere. If they do make it into the Champions League this season, I think they probably stick around. You've seen their recruitment policy. You've seen how stable that club finally is after 10 years of absolute turmoil. And you see the amount of talent that's growing together. This team only gets better, and it hits milestone after milestone. And if Milan make it into the Champions League this year, which I think they will, I think they'll just stick around. And then Benacer doesn't even need to find a move. He's just in the Champions League. He's a £20 million Champions League asset at the age of 23. Consistent starter for a very, very strong side. I like it.
Yeah, it's all positive, isn't it? Not just with Benacer, but the way you're talking about Milan there, it's like at a time where maybe it's just overreacting to a few poor seasons across Europe, but at a time where it feels some of the so-called giants of European football might be on a bit of a downward trend on and off the pitch, it feels like Milan are quite specifically going in the other direction. And, you know, not just for Benacer, but that's quite good for us to know for five-wide purposes when looking at their squad and those who they might look to bring in.
Well, yeah, look at the recent price changes when we get the tranche of price changes and all of the negative ones, which obviously you look for very cautiously. Hopefully none of my players are in this list. Recently, we've seen a lot of Liverpool players in those reductions, and that's obviously based on the fact that likelihood is they're not playing Champions League next season, so their value goes down. I personally want to be ahead of the game here, and at a certain point this season, if Milan seal qualification to the Champions League, or it becomes overwhelmingly obvious that they're going to do so, you're going to see a lot of Milan players on the other side of that list in green. They're all going to go up in a batch, just like the Liverpool players have gone down recently. You want to be preempting that. And it's not just about Benacer. You can go and take a look at all the Milan players and think, all right, your horizons have been significantly expanded here, and get in first.
Absolutely, just like you did with Marlon, your buy of Rafinha, I know, going quite well, as well as the usuals, Elise.
And thanks to you, Michael Elise, as well.
Sam,
cheers, mate.
or should I call you Typhoon Tigray? Thank you for joining us on this week's 5x5. Next up, George's turn to talk to Andy Francis. Andy's on the inside. He is a 5-yard scout, a 5-yards analyst. He sets the prices, and he's going to talk us through a couple of French players heading up on the platform this week.
Bonjour, salut, ça va, because this is a Ligue 1 special, and Andy, we're going to be discussing 4 players, and then Ali will be speaking to Sam Tai about another. But let's start with, I think, the player that is the most exciting of these 4. All 4 of these players are going up on 5 yards this week, so by the time the transfer window opens again on Friday, they will be up there for you to buy. The prices at the moment, we will endeavour, unless something changes, we'll endeavour for the players to be going up at the prices we're going to be talking about now, in case, if somebody gets a serious injury or whatever, or there's a transfer rumour, they might change, but we'll do our best. And we're going to start with a player at Ram, Nathaniel Mbuku, who is going up at 41 million. He's just 18 years old, playing mainly on the right-hand side, on the right wing, and he scored 2 goals and got 1 assist so far this season. 41 million though, and he puts him right up in that kind of top bracket of elite teenage prospects. So what is it about him that really takes your fancy?
He's lightning quick for a start. He's going to beat his man and probably come back and beat him again before the defender knows what's happening. He's performed really well as well. His output this season's not that great, but in general it's been pretty good. He started at the Under-17 World Cup in 2019, scored 5 goals. Players who have done that before are Guiri at Nice and Osimhen at Napoli, and they're kind of priced at around 40 to 50 million on 5 yards as well. So that's kind of a good indicator that we've got that price about right, hopefully. And it puts him in the same bracket as Yarzabal and Diaby at Leverkusen, as you say. So kind of that winger who's not quite at that elite level, but not far off. But yeah, he's so quick. His feet are so quick. So he's turning defenders inside out and getting past them. And yeah, one of the highlights of his career so far has been his first senior goal, which was an overhead kick. Which is not a bad way to start your career, I don't think.
Yeah, not bad at all. And you know, those who've gone on to 5 yards and written scout reports will know all about them. We're seeing, it's been really actually great to see in the last few weeks how popular the scouting side of 5 yards is going, really, because in the first few weeks everyone was playing a lot. We weren't seeing that many scout reports, but now with the Scout of the Month competition, people really buying into that. And when you do the scout reports, you have to say what, you know, where a player may end up effectively. And, you know, he's at a club at the moment, Mbuku, where it's unlikely, presumably, if he carries on performing at this level, that he'll stay there for very long. So where would you like to see him go as the next move? Where do you think he'd fit?
Well, he has been scouted by Liverpool, Leeds. So top Premier League clubs are already aware of him and kind of have his name on their list, so to speak. I see him playing for a team like Arsenal, kind of how Arsenal should play anyway, that kind of free-flowing, quite attacking, quick football. So yeah, but I definitely see him at a Champions League club, whether that's Arsenal or not, I'm not sure. But yeah, I definitely see him at that kind of club where he can really test himself at the top level. And we've kind of factored that into the price of him moving to a top club. Using the scouting system on 5 yards, I'd have him rated at about 74. So about an average Premier League player right now. But obviously he's only 18. He's got so many years ahead of him. He could easily be a top Champions League player and reach a 87, 88 rating on that scout rating.
Interesting stuff. 41 million there for Mbuku. I have a feeling normally these players, when they go up, these teenagers, they attract some early interest. So it'll be interesting to see if there's any there on Friday. On now to a player, and you know, I can't often say this on 5x5. I'm an Oxford fan, but a player that I've seen live play against Oxford in Steffi Mavididi. He's had, you know, an interesting career to date. He's 22 years old now. He came through at Arsenal. He had loans at Preston and at Charlton, for whom he was playing when I saw him at the Valley against my beloved Yellows. He then went to Juventus, went out on loan to Dijon and had a good season, a breakthrough season in the last campaign, which then got Montpellier to get him in ahead of this season, so last summer. And he's had a decent start now. I mean, are we starting to see, you know, promise and potential turning into actual ability here with Mavididi?
Yeah, I think so. And I think one of the biggest things behind that is a change in position. I'm sure when you watched him for Charlton, he was probably up front. But at Montpellier this season, he's actually been playing in a wide position. And that's kind of complemented his game a bit. He's a really good dribbler, so he's attacking players constantly, and he's much better doing that from a deep position. So he's completed 6.5 dribbles roughly per game this season in Ligue, which is the third highest in the league. So he's in that kind of top tier bracket in the league in terms of moving with the ball at defences. And I think that's really helped him. But it hasn't kind of stopped him scoring goals. He's got 7 goals in about 1,300 minutes this season. So a goal every other game, which is not a bad return for a striker, let alone someone who's been playing in a wider position. So I think maybe we're starting to see him perform how he should.
It's interesting looking at his, from an outsider who hasn't seen him play at all this season, looking at how much he's been involved. He's 22 years of age, so he's not as young as, for example, Mbuku. You can understand being in and out of the team, but he's scored 7 goals in his 14 starts, but has come off the bench 11 times as well, so not necessarily a regular starter. Do you reckon we'll kind of see his goal input and therefore his PP rise as he becomes more accomplished and more established in the side?
Yeah, I think so. So as I said before, we're looking at kind of 3-year cycles of how players are going to perform, and I can see him gaining more minutes in each of those years as he becomes more competent on the pitch. And I mean, he could be a really vital player for Montpellier. I'm not sure his future lies at a Champions League club. I'm not sure he's going to be in that top tier, but he could definitely be a leading Ligue player outside of kind of that PSG Lyon stronghold at the top that Lille were trying to break into this season. So yeah, I don't see him leaving Montpellier in the next 2.5-3 years, but I think he can definitely rack up the PP within Liga, definitely.
And that's why he's 17 million rather than 30, 40, 50 million, I'm guessing. These guys know what they're doing.
Exactly, yeah.
2 more players we're going to talk about. Boubakary Soumaré next at Lille, who's going up at 26 million as it stands, a 22-year-old holding midfielder. And I found it quite amusing when I was doing my research this morning to see a lot of, he's been linked with Arsenal, and a lot of Arsenal kind of fan sites saying, we're finally getting in the heir to Patrick Vieira. And I do wonder, 15 years on, or however long it's been, when can we actually say, maybe that heir apparent is a thing of the past and you've got to just move on from that player. But I mean, is there a stylistic comparison there to be made, or is it just a pretty lazy one on behalf of Arsenal fans?
No, I was going to ask if you've been reading my notes.
No,
because,
I haven't.
That's exactly what I've got written down.
Brilliant, amazing.
He's really tall, almost to that gangly level where you're not quite sure where his limbs are going to go. But he's reminiscent of Patrick Vieira, the way he plays, and his style is, he's really strong on the ball. He'll drive forward, but he'll also look to break the lines with his passing. And some of his passes are amazing in getting past the defence, but he's still managed a 90% pass completion rate this season, which is fantastic. But I'm probably most excited about Soumaré out of all of these 4 players. I think he's got a big future. I think he definitely plays for a Champions League club. Obviously, next season with Lille, he probably will be in the Champions League, unless they have a massive collapse in the closing stages of the season. But I think he's got the potential to go to a club the size of Tottenham, as an Arsenal, as you've said. He's got the potential to play in La Liga or Premier League where the PP is that much higher, and he can really rack up some PP over the next few years, I think.
I was going to say, I mean, one of the difficult things for me, somebody who plays 5 yards, is trying to work out where the value lies in terms of holding midfielders, because you've got someone here in Soumaré who unless there's an injury or something down the line, we probably expect to be playing top level football, probably Champions League level football for the next 10 or so years. But he's not somebody who, unless there's a significant change to his style of football, who's going to get loads of goals or loads of assists in a season. So, are you looking for the calibre, the quality of team that they're playing for when valuing? Are you looking for wins? Is it even going as far as international recognition?
Yeah, that definitely comes into it. When we're looking at central defenders and those defensive midfielders who aren't going to get in the goals or the assists quite often, is what calibre of team they're going to play for if they're going to play Champions League football and rack up the wins, because 2 wins in the Champions League and you've earned over £1 million in PP. It's huge if you get that Champions League football in terms of in PP on 5 yards. So yeah, we're definitely looking at that, and he's not going to score goals. I think he's scored once since May 2019. That's not part of his game, really. If he adds goals, then brilliant. Then that 26 million valuation that we've got him at is probably going to be dwarfed. But I can't see him adding that many goals. But I could definitely see him playing for a top European team, which would really increase his value.
Interesting one there, maybe for those who want a bit of a long game, happy to sit on a player and just watch them rack up the PPs, rack up the wins in the future. That is Boubakary Soumaré at Lille. Final one we're going to talk about, Andy, is the cheapest of the four, the Brest striker Irvin Cardona, who's going up at about 14 million. He's the oldest as well at 23 years of age, but he scored the most goals this season with 8 already. He came through at Monaco, had a successful loan in Belgium at Cercle Brugge, and then found his way to Brest this season, where he's doing some good bits. What kind of a striker is he?
He's really versatile, and I think that probably stops his value going that high on 5 yards because he's not an out-and-out striker. He'll sometimes play on the left, he'll sometimes play on the right, and he's quite happy to drop back and defend as well. So he's not constantly in the penalty area on the end of chances. He's quite often creating those chances. And I think that kind of shows with his goal output this season, where he's scoring 1 every 3 games, 4 games roughly. So I don't think he's ever going to be a Haaland or a Mbappe who's scoring week in, week out. But he's definitely got a lot of potential. I think I could see him playing for a Marseille, the kind of club that flirts with the Champions League. Maybe he's in the Champions League every other season, so he can rack up a little bit of PP along the way. But yeah, I don't think it helps him in terms of getting too much PP week on week. But the move to the right club, and again, he could make that 14 million look really small.
It's interesting because he seems to be a classic case, Cardona, if he moves to the right club. Basically, if he gets a move, even if it's a kind of a sideways step in terms of quality of club, if he moves to a bottom half Premier League team or whatever, suddenly the PP jumps. Then if he's scoring 8 goals in a season for one of those, then it's going to be better off. I mean, where do we see Ligue 1 as a league at the moment, quality-wise, within the European major leagues?
I think it's one of the big 5, but it's probably number 5 of the big 5, which is reflected in the PP levels. I've kind of worked within or around Liga for about 3 or 4 years now, so I'm a little bit biased. And it's a really fun league to watch, and I'm enjoying it this season. They're kind of that PSG stronghold looks like it's going to be broken this season, which is fantastic for French football, I think. And there are so many young French players coming through. The French national team in 5 years, 10 years can be really scary. There's a lot of talent going through. And then you've got players like Laporte at Man City who haven't even got a French cap, which is madness, really.
Unbelievable.
There's so much depth there, and that comes from Ligue. Yeah. And that comes from Ligue. So, it might be number 5 of the big 5, but it's definitely producing some top-level talent that the big clubs are picking off.
But, I mean, we definitely saw that in the Premier League, 5 or 6 years ago. There was maybe, N'Golo Kante being the poster boy, even though that wasn't even from Ligue 1, was it? But are we still seeing, and I don't know, I'm a novice in terms of what Brexit means for the transfer market and at top-level football, but what is the kind of scope looking like in order for players moving from Liga over to the Premier League in the next couple of seasons? Are we still seeing a big interest there?
Yeah, I think so. There's a really good video out there on YouTube by my fellow scout Andy Watson, who goes into depth about the new work permit system that kind of goes over my head a little bit. I need to probably brush up on that quite quickly. But no, I don't think it should affect France too much. They're a big nation, plenty of minutes on the pitch, and it shouldn't affect too much. There's been a big issue this season over the TV rights in France, which has really kind of scared quite a few clubs, and I think players might be willing to jump ship a little bit, but it seems to have resolved itself, hopefully to a level where the league can still compete within that top 5, and hopefully kind of push Italy and Germany for number 3 or number 4.
Brilliant insight from Andy there, talking to George, not just about the inner workings of the 5 yards transfer market, but also about this group of players in French football. George, out of the gang that he spoke about there, who's the one that interests you most in 5 yards terms, and why?
For 5x5, for me it is Boubakary Soumaré, I think is the one. You heard how smitten Andy was with him. He's obviously got all the defensive capabilities to be an elite level defensive midfielder. You heard how he can pick a pass, the comparisons with Patrick Vieira. If he goes on to have a career like Patrick Vieira, then that 26 million is going to look pretty cheap. And Buku's obviously the most interesting one at 41 million, an 18-year-old, a teenager. But, he's at Rennes at the moment, and you'd probably think that the price is already taking into account that big move that he's likely to get. So Soumaré for me is the one.
Okay, well, I've enjoyed this French-themed 5x5 or 5y5, as you insist on calling it this week. I'd be keen to zoom in on a couple of other nations, a couple of other leagues from across Europe. So any suggestions, guys, of leagues you'd like us to focus on, or individual players, anything like that, we're always keen to hear from you. Any questions about 5 yards as well, we're happy to answer, as is the rest of the team. So whether it's a DM to our Twitter account, a comment on our YouTube page, an email, there's a ton of ways of getting in touch, and we're open to any questions, queries, problems, or just to chat all things 5 yards. Thanks so much to Sam and Andy for joining us this week. We will be back as ever, faithfully, dutifully, next week with another episode of 5y5. So make sure you're subscribed on YouTube or on your preferred podcast provider. That's a tricky sentence to say. We'll talk again next week.